I'd like to call us to order if we could. I know masks are optional. I'm far enough away from the rest of you, so I feel comfortable taking my mask off. It's up to you. I don't know the policy here, but I've had my shots and I'm spayed and neutered, so I'm good to go. Welcome to the Readfield Candidates Night. For those of you at home, there are about 25 people in the audience. I'm Doug Stevenson. I'm your moderator. You can throw things at me if you need to, hopefully not. And we're going to have questions and conversation with the candidates. There are 4 here for the select board, and I think there are perhaps 4 either here or coming for the school board. We'll do the select board questions first. The format has been given to the candidates in advance, but I'll just review it quickly. They each have 2 or 3 minutes to talk about themselves, introduce themselves, talk about why they want to do this work. We appreciate everybody both running for jobs and for fulfilling those jobs. So it's important to have these nights to understand who's doing the work. Then we'll have a series of questions that we've crafted ahead of time, and the candidates have actually seen them. So this is not a extemporaneous challenge. This is thoughtful response. And then at the end, we'll have a couple minutes for them each to wrap up. I will introduce them from left to right, and we'll advance the questions, if I can remember, one person at a time. So somebody new gets to start each time. Hopefully, I don't have to wave any red and yellow cards at you, but if you can keep your responses to 2 or 3 minutes, that would be good. We'll get through some questions. Some of these questions probably can't be discussed in 2 or 3 minutes, so I'll give you some leeway. But I think the folks here have an interest in what you're going to say. If there are questions in the audience circulating, you can direct them to me, and I will try to combine similar questions if I get any from you. We try to keep this as generic as we can, but sometimes questions have to be focused so we get a specific answer. So are there any questions about our process? I can't see the producer, so I'm guessing he can see us and he can move his camera around, so that's good. So let us start. Steve, if you can take a couple minutes, tell us who you are, why you want this job, and where you see the town going before you start down the road. Let's start with you.
Sure. So I am Steve DeAngelis, and I've lived in Readfield now for 44 years. I came here to start a teaching job at Maranacook after a couple of years as an engineer, and it was kind of on a lark. I wasn't really planning on sticking with it, and I turned out to be wrong about that. And I couldn't be happier about it. I think I've thought about doing this kind of thing for a long time, but didn't feel I could do justice to being a full-time teacher and serving on the select board. I don't know how you did it when you were doing it, Catherine. I know you have, but I don't know how. But I feel a very deep connection to the town and the people who live here, and make it their home. And they're my neighbors, they're my friends, they're my students, former students, parents of students, on down the line, right? So I have a lot of connections there, and it matters a lot to me to try to give back to town, because we brought all 3 of our kids up here. They went to school K through 12. We lived here for a long time, and I feel like I want to give back to the people in the community. They've paid part of my salary for 44 years. I kind of owe them. And so that really matters to me. And my major goal, were I to be devoted to the select board, is to encourage us to listen and talk to each other and work together and try to find common ground whenever possible. I know that, the basic roles of select board, trying to oversee some of the functions of town government, but I really feel strongly that my goal is to try to be someone who will listen to anyone in town, listen to what they say, hear what they say, evaluate our options, and help the board make both fiscally sound decisions and also things that reflect the majority of our residents, while at the same time really trying to look forward and think about not just what's going on this year and with this year's budget and this year's part, about where are we going to be down the line. So, and again, I think for me, the biggest thing is trying to find common ground with the folks who live here.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Bob, you can go next.
Okay. My name is Bob Itar, and I'm very pleased to be here. I wake up each morning. It's a gift, and I'm pleased. several weeks ago, several months ago, I walked into a select board meeting, at which point they were talking about the broadband system that had been suggested and had been introduced. I've spent 20 years in 20 years as a director of computing at one of the largest universities. I know broadband systems. I know computing systems. I continue to look at and know them. And I was surprised about and concerned about the suggestion that we spend in this town $5 million for a system to connect every single home. For many reasons, I felt that this was wrong. I've sent notes to some people, and I think you might have received them. I think we have to rethink this, but there are many reasons for that. It was ill-advised, I think, and a lot of work went into this by some bright people. But that doesn't mean that they had all of the information or that they were really well-versed in fiber optic systems or computer systems or other of the infrastructure systems that are necessary to maintain this kind of operation. After 20 years, I think I am. I still am familiar with modern systems of software, big data development. I am very active in finance to look at these things, not just casually, but every day. This is my life. We're not interested in big data systems here. It doesn't appeal to us. It's not really part of our town. I think that's enough of this right now. I came here to say, I like Steve. I've known him a long time. Bright man, good man. I've talked to people about this broadband system. I had people who are well-known here who came to me and said, can you find out how much it's really going to cost? I said, God, these are people who are articulate, who actually speak. People who you know, no names. And they asked me to find out. They're afraid to speak. And that is a shame. We must speak. I'm not afraid, as people probably would know by now. I'm sorry. Forgive me for this. But yeah. Democracy is messy. It's messy. To have a board all in unison say this and agree is not the best thing, especially when you're dealing with large systems and large indebtedness and so on, big commitments to this town and its financial. I'm talking too much about it. But
Let me just interrupt you and say that we'll come back to some of those things if you want later. This is the introduction.
yes,
so
please.
We're going to come back to a lot of those same things. So I'll be glad to hear more if we can move on. And
Yes,
then
absolutely.
I'll come back to you.
That's very
So
good.
Catherine, you have 2 or 3 minutes and let's
Yes,
have it.
I'm Catherine Mills Woodson, and I have lived in Kents Hill for 43 years with my husband. We raised 3 children here, 2 of whom went through schools here. I would love to have another term on the select board. I've been greatly involved in the town over many years. I worked at Saunders Manufacturing here in town for 4 years, a long time ago. And I recently just retired from 33 years of teaching mathematics at Mount Blue High School, which Steve has already noted. I've served the town in many capacities over the past 19 years, including 12 years on the select board, having served as chair and vice chair. I worked on the budget committee for 7 years and was instrumental in us developing our first capital improvement plan. I received a Spirit of America Award from the town of Readfield for public service in 2013. I serve on the solid waste committee and have been the chair, and I'm in my 15th year now. I also serve on the broadband committee since it was formed 2 years ago. I've also been an election volunteer counting ballots for many years. So I've run into lots of folks over time I've heard from people and I'm very interested in listening to folks. And I always try to make my decisions based on what I think is best for the majority of people. During the last 3 years, my select board colleagues and I, with the help of the budget committee, have developed 2 consecutive budgets without a mill rate increase during a very challenging time for all of us, both locally, statewide, and nationally. I think the next 3 years will be equally as challenging, trying to maintain town services and our quality of life at the lowest possible cost during what are certain to be inflationary times. I'm proud to serve with the members of our select board who give their time to research the issues and to listen to the input of all residents, making decisions that benefit the entire town while following all laws. It is always the duty of the select board to follow directives set by town meeting and to move forward. I would just add that on the broadband issue, that did go before the town voters in November. We had the largest voter turnout that we know of in town, I believe, at over 1,100 residents voting, and 78% of them asked us to move forward on broadband. So I think we have a lot of public support for continuing the investigation and bringing the project forward for a second vote for approval or not. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Catherine. Eric, sir.
Yes, my name is Eric Johnson. I moved here 7 years ago with my wife and stepson. We moved here because of the school system. The school system is outstanding, and I thank the teachers that helped my stepson get through. I have the alpacas on Church Road. I am also the animal control officer for Readfield. I've retired from government work. I was the chief of admin services in Augusta for the Maine Army National Guard. I've also been an EMT and a firefighter in Waterville. I worked for Delta Ambulance for many years. I've been around talking to people. I wanted to come into this position to let everybody know that they have a say. Listening to people and listening to what their feelings are. There is no right or wrong. We have to decipher and talk to people and find out how they feel. And I feel that I can do a good job listening to people, acting on what they say and how they feel, and bringing that to the different boards. Talking about the broadband, that's a subject that everybody is talking about. Also, the baseball field. I've had several people come up and say, well, how come we don't have handicap parking at the ball field? How come my father can't go down and see the games because he's in a wheelchair? They're small things, but they're very large to people in our community. And if I do get this position, it'll be because of the people in Readfield. And I will do everything I can humanly possible to help those people with their ideas and bring those ideas forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So I'd like to go through some questions. We'll start, Bob, with you next down and then keep going. So this is sort of a general question. I know you each have very broad question. I don't want to use the word broad because there's too many parts of broadband there, but there are issues facing the community. I'm just wondering if there's something as a select person, is that what you call them in Readfield, that you would feel personally challenged to take on the sponsorship of. So is there something that you want to be the champion of to see that is planned, properly resourced, communicated to people, and taken on to success? So Bob, we'll start with you, and the same question goes to everybody.
Well, I guess, yes. The budget issue, I think, is one that would appeal to me. And I think it requires a balance of understanding and a little more sensitivity to the nature of the entire population in Readfield. Ms. Woodson, Catherine, already spoke to the the tax rate remaining the same. That's very good. I think that what's happening this coming year is particularly disturbing. We have a Federal Reserve already stating that they are going to contract our economy. This is not punitive, it's necessary. Inflation, higher interest rates, lower property values. We are facing, and I think I wrote it in a note, a financial winter, a time in which we must work together to look at the ways in which we're sensitive to the people in this town. We've got to roll back some increases in spending. Rethink some of the things that we've done. We've got to pivot in ways that we haven't done before. People will lose their homes. These are the realities of what's happening. Now, that sounds very dramatic, but I believe that they are dramatic, and it's over 2 to 3 years. So we've got to be very prepared for contingencies and so on. Am I taking too much time?
No. I was looking for something else.
Oh, yes. That's an important part of what I'd be doing here. I came out of a hospital to be here tonight. 2 weeks ago, I had bypass surgery, 3 arteries, open heart surgery, and I'm here today, 2 weeks later, because this is important to me. What's important is not just the restriction of the budget, but the encompassing, as Eric has spoken about. There's an element, there's a place in which people do not feel that they've been heard. And I agree. That's it. That's all I
Okay,
have to
that's
say
good.
right now.
Thank you.
If that's enough.
It's up to you. I only turned away because my phone turned off and I couldn't see how the clock was coming. So I apologize for that. Happened last time too. I should learn how to use my clock. So Catherine, same question for you. Is there some issue that you feel that you could champion and bring it to success that was specifically related to what you'd like to see?
Well, the first thing I'd like to touch on is that it's a response to something Bob opened with, which is whether the select board agrees on things or not, and whether that makes for good policy or not. The way our board functions, rather than making a motion and then having discussion, we tend to discuss something, and oftentimes people change their thoughts on how they want to proceed through that discussion, so that by the time we make a motion, we've kind of already felt each other out and figured out what would be most appropriate to take for action. And most times we do end up agreeing. And I think that's just the embodiment of good governance, that people can sit and discuss things. When they have differences, we make concessions and come up with a compromise and try to do what's best for everyone. In terms of things that I would champion, I would certainly make sure that we continue doing that, because I think that's the most important part. It's a very open process. People are welcome to come anytime. We often have 1 or 2 people show up in person. We've been having a few folks show up online. I'm currently a champion for the broadband project, which I work on, also for the fairgrounds project. We've heard from numerous parents and community members about the need to have more fields. And especially there's an equity issue there, which the town really wants to address, which is having a field for girls. We currently only have a field for boys, and that's really not right. A softball field is different, and it will make a multi-use facility. In addition to that, the transfer station has some challenges coming forward. We need to continue our improvements there. We've been making great strides lately with our composting project. The swap shop has just recently reopened, and I'd like to make sure that the transfer station continues moving in a direction that Readfield instituted way back in the 90s, before many towns were taking recycling seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Eric? I know you had a passion about the handicapped access, but are there other things in addition to that that you'd like to take over?
Yes, sir. I see our budget being very high. If the voters vote in what we have now. I kind of agree with Bob. We're coming into trying times. A surplus is a good thing. The mill rate has not gone up in several years. I would like to see the mill rate go down. I would like to curve in some of the spending that is being done. I guess I would like to champion the thought of having a ambulance and fire, full-time ambulance and fire service in this town, involving the other 3 towns around us. We're getting older and it takes longer for an ambulance to get from Winthrop to here. I don't know if we'll have ambulance service in town this summer because of the problem of not having enough medics and EMTs to staff other towns. That's a project that would take years, but I would really like to be part of that, to bring that into this community. Broadband, I think that I would like to see more grants, more federal grants, and not the $5 million that is projected now. Again, we're coming into hard times. Elderly people are going to need help. Are we able to give that help to those people on individual occasions? We need to watch our pennies. We watch our pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. So that's all I have to say.
Well, thanks,
Thank you.
Eric. It occurs to me when I'm thinking back to the last time that we had this, there were a lot of projects described that seemed to be driving Readfield to a specific affect, the place you wanted to be. And I think that came out of the comprehensive plan, a lot of that. So I'm just next want to ask you a question. I guess we'll start with Catherine with you, but
Wait, excuse me.
Yeah.
We didn't do Steve on the last question.
I didn't do Steve.
Nope, because we started with Bob.
Started Bob and it's
No,
okay.
No, I understand what we did. I was trying to keep to my clock, Steve. You're on.
All right, I'm all good with that.
Thanks for that. But I want to come back to the next question right now, but you can ignore it. But I want to get to the place where the community is really going and fulfilling its comprehensive plan. So Steve, before we do that, what do you
Deal.
want to take over
All
and
right.
make go?
So to me, I don't feel like I'm at a point where I want to say this is the thing, the one thing that I'd like to take over. But I do feel like there's a couple things that are going on that I actually really like a lot. One of the things I like is I like that our board, our current board and town manager are proposing bold ideas. I think that's important. The town has the final say. So, I'm very sensitive to what you're saying, Eric and Bob, about, the significant cost of those items, right? But I think the board has done a really good job of laying out 2 things that are really important to the town and that we should be looking at. Now, if the board always takes the idea of like, oh, it would cost too much money to do this, then the voters don't have a say in that, right? So I want them to have that say. And for sure, if I was to pick one thing I really want to go after is that's connected to this is the idea that I like the idea of our town being an inclusive place, a place that lots of people have access to. Your idea of the handicap access, I think, is really critical to fields, but also an age-friendly place. As a very soon to be retiree, I have a vested interest there, I know, but I spend a lot of time connecting. I'll walk home from school often along the trails and connect to the fairgrounds. I spend a lot of time running and walking on those, skiing in the winter. And I see so many folks out there, right? And one of the things I love, I noticed especially this spring, is on the trail with the nice crushed rock and stuff. They're easy to walk on, not a lot of roots to trip over and stuff. There's a ton of elderly folks out there all the time, even more elderly than me, and I think that's important that we have that kind of access for people. And so that's a real big thing for me. And again, I recognize the significant cost of bold ideas like that in the broadband, but the town has the final say. The voters have the final say. And if they feel like it's too much, then we go back to the drawing board and do something different. But it's really important to get those ideas out there and be forward thinking.
So I noticed a common theme. Everybody's talked about us all getting older. I don't think I've been to a meeting where that was the prime theme.
But that's not the prime theme, but it is preferable to the alternative.
No,
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of that, I just want to come back to what I said before about how I was impressed the last time we heard about the talk that was going on about the plans, how you had recreational focus, you had a communication focus, you had a focus on making it possible for people to stay in the town and do their work. So it was a center for work as opposed to having to go places. So those are all ingredients of the comprehensive plan. We're coming, I guess, sort of to the end of the first phase of implementing it. So I'm just wondering if there are things that you'd like to talk about that you see really needing to be finished or taking over to finish the plan that was designed that you think is what Readfield's trying to head toward in the next 5 or 10 years. And Catherine, we'll start with you.
Okay.
You may have some ideas. We're going to talk about capital projects in a minute, but maybe some of this falls into that category. So don't hold back.
Sure. Well, currently the Comprehensive Plan Committee is working. They've been working, I think, now for about 1.5 years. We thought we would be done now or possibly in November, but it will be next June. The plan is being revised. It's probably, I think it's 11 years old now, so we'll be just over our time period. It will lay out the future for the next 10 years. We have people from all different committees and other volunteers who are working on that. We're working on a survey to put out for people both in print and on SurveyMonkey to get lots of input. And that plan is the driving force behind everything in town. It's what we refer to, what the select board does when we're trying to interpret what the town meeting has instructed us to do, which therefore we must do, and what we think the interpretation of those issues are. It's very important that we address the majority vote of the voters. We had a clear vote on the broadband issue to continue with 78% of a large population voting. And so that's what we've done, as Steve has noted. And then that issue goes to the voters, which we promised it would do. When the voters gave the $5 million approval for spending, we said we would come back and ask a second time. We didn't have to, but we are because we're following through on our word. So I think it's important because broadband is just expanding rapidly and it helps people to stay at home, to age at home, which is one of the big things. I think it's important that people be able to get outside. In the current plan for the community fairgrounds project, there is handicapped access built into that. There's an 8-foot wide, I believe it's 8-foot wide gravel path that will go down from the current parking lot to the field. So that's already been considered and included. I think it's also important looking forward to continue the awesome work that our various committees do. We have, I think, about 100 volunteers that work on committees on a monthly basis, which is fantastic. So I guess that would be my vision for the future.
Okay, thank you. Eric, anything you'd want to add for that for yourself?
As Catherine mentioned about the sidewalk or the crushed stone going down to the ball fields, I think that needs to be put in at some point in time, a hard surface, so people in wheelchairs and crutches can get down and get into the ball fields. The people on all these committees have done an outstanding job. I have not lived here long enough to really understand what the capital improvements are over the next 10 years. That is something that I need to know. I do know that people talk about different things, ambulances, sidewalks, safety, what's going to happen if I can't pay my taxes. We need to listen to the people out there that have these genuine concerns and bring them to the proper, guide them to what board they should go see, where they should go. Try to give them an answer that can prove to them that they can go forward with some hope of resolving their issues. But no, that's what all I have right now.
Thank you. Steve?
Before I get to what I was going to say to start with, I do want to respond to the last thing that Eric said that I think is really important, and that is that even if 78% of the residents approve the broadband, so let's say maybe some of those 22% don't approve it because they know it's going to be a financial hardship for them, any increase at all. And we need to pay attention to that. We need to listen to that and come up with ways to make sure that it's not just 78% of the voters we listen to, but 100%, you know? So I think that's a really good point, Eric. I thank you for making that, right? But for me, again, I'm going to come back to, if I had one thing, Catherine has a much better knowledge of the entire comprehensive plan, but the one thing I think that sticks in my mind again and again and again is I want to see Readfield be the kind of place that people want to live in and can afford to live in. And part of that desire is to make it a place where people have access to as much of the town as possible, right? And so I want to see us continue to work toward protecting more open space, to making the trails we do have as accessible as possible, and to expanding them, and find ways to make it so that the folks in town have access to as many of the things that they want to do as possible. I do think the broadband is important in another aspect, and Catherine mentioned this. The rural nature of our town is important to me. And I think a key part of being able to have a good tax base, a successful, thriving community, a vibrant community, and still maintaining the rural character of it is broadband. Broadband makes it possible for people to work from home, to run small businesses from home, do a lot of things that help keep our town in the kind of character that I think many of the folks who live here want to see.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, this again, broadband is my native language. And I take exception to the fact that it's useful in this town and in this setting. I think it should be, we should have a debate about it. I'd like to speak to the actual issue. I don't think it's effective for the town. It isolates older people. I don't think it's important. So let me deal with something else that you said, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We're talking about the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is extremely important. It begins with a prelude in which Potter Clark, wrote a preface that indicates that it's the historical nature of this town, its history, its legacy is the most important thing we bring to this town. And that expression is very important to me and to my wife, Helen. She's dead, but it was our importance to us. We did our doctoral work in American history at NYU. For that reason, we went to Millstream Road and restored the oldest building in Kennebec County and the oldest one in this town. It's a beautiful historic place. Now, we're talking about places, things for the older people. Steve, I'm older, and people my age and older would like to go on walks and so on, and we do, but we need a place to go. We need a place to go. Places to go, more than one. We need a community center. We need places that actually open up for us and interaction with the people of the town. There is little left. There's no place for us to meet. Think about, for those people who love this town, I know you do, Catherine. Think about the dump, the transfer station. The dump was the place we met. How many times? You'd meet someone and you'd talk. You can't talk there any longer. You're asked to leave. You're pushed ahead. And this is very true. And it's very important. What we've done at the community center is eliminate the transfer center. We've eliminated the one place left for this town to meet. The one place left for older people to say, hey, is your wife still living? Or how are you feeling? I heard about. This is essential. And so our suggestion is this: the transfer station has to be modified to again restore those places where people meet, we discuss, we talk, we open credentials for different things to talk about. We create a dialogue. That's extremely important. There is no place else. Where does anyone go if they want to run for office? Forget about you and I. But let's say someone, where do they go? There's no place to present papers. There's no place to talk to anyone. No, it has to be highlighted. And so for that reason, I suggest two things. I hope I'm not suggesting too much. But two things, cheap things. I know Catherine was speaking at one of these past board meetings, and she said there's going to be $2,000 spent on some of the information that's going to be distributed about the plan, about the grants and so on. I thought $2,000, and there was $2,000 before. That's $4,000, plus there's another printing, and then there's a distribution. Money. And so what I'm thinking is this. Let's take the one place that everybody goes, and that's the transfer station. Put up 2 large monitors, and on that monitor, one monitor is for the select board. Let us know what you're doing. Let us know what we're doing. Headlines, $5 million loan. We will not get federal or state taxes. We're going to pay. Bullet points, a couple, for the most important things. The field for the young girls who want to suffer. Absolutely, that should be number 1 on our agenda. Number 1, but it doesn't have to cost $500,000. And you say, well, we've already thought about it. Think again. Let's go back. Let's go back. And what else is there? Another bulletin board, an electronic board, one for select people or people running for office. Announce their names. Let them stand right there and hand out a pamphlet. Let them be introduced to the town. We don't know who they are. And many people who know. I'm taking too much time.
Okay, well, that's all right. Let's work the rest of your comments into the next question then. So
Okay.
we'll start with Eric this time. And I'm just curious, one of the things that strikes me about Readfield is there are so many people involved in things. Catherine mentioned 100 people on committees. That can come and go. And so I understand that that's really part of the bloodstream of this town is the number of people who actually engaged in the activities of the community on behalf of the community, not on the behalf of themselves. So my question is, how do you keep that going? How do you engage those people and others to continue that? You're fortunate you have so many. It would be a hard question if we said, where are we starting from scratch? But let's just talk about the way that we engage the citizenry in the work of the community. That's really the question.
I feel that, and we need a place to meet. We need a place where people can go. Bob came up with, at the transfer station, having signs. I think that this committee and the people of Readfield want to see a final disposition on Helen's Place. It's cost us a lot of money, both town money and Bob's money. His ideas are awesome. Having a place.
Can we just keep it to my question though, about how you engage the people in the
Well,
work
that's
of the
how we
community?
would engage the people.
Okay.
To have them come to a place where they can get together, where they can communicate. It's extremely important that this year that people vote. We need to put that out to the people in town, in Readfield. We have a community that is very, very involved, and it's nice to see that. I think that our communication can be a lot better with the townspeople on what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Steve,
Well,
how you engage the citizenry in the work of the town?
I think a key piece of this is encouraging people to show up in different ways. One of the many quotes I have floating around my room at school is, show up. The world is run by people who show up. And one way to show up, of course, is running for a local office, but another way to do it is to vote. and to get your voice heard that way. Come to the public meetings, come to, involve yourself as much as you can. And part of that, of the way to make that happen, I think it's one of the major reasons why I felt like I should try to do this year. And that is that part of this comes from trust and having trust in the folks that are encouraging you to come out, that are running the town, that are involved in town government. And I think by now, most people in town know me pretty well, or at least know of me, and know that they can trust me. They trusted me for a long time with their kids, and they know that I'm willing to listen to them. And that's a big piece of it. One of the things that has been foundational in my teaching has been that relationships are the key to good teaching. The relationships you have with your students, when they know that you care about them, when they know that their success is important to you, they're going to work hard for you. Those relationships really matter. And I think that relationships are key to good select boarding, if that's a thing. And so for me, I think that's the key way to do it is to build those relationships.
Okay, thanks. Bob, how do we engage the people to do the work of the town?
Great question. And Steve began with a good answer. And I appreciate it. He's right. Catherine will agree. As teachers, I've taught for 20 years, longer, more like 30. But anyway, we know that if you walk into a classroom and they don't trust you, they turn you off. They do. And you'll never get them back. You have 10 seconds to get that crowd. I walked into the planning board, the select board meeting. It's a good meeting. It runs. It runs. And there's a clock, 5 minutes for this question, 5 minutes for this question, okay, we got 10 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Are we up? Done, right on time. And let me tell you, there is no room for you. No room to say, well, wait a second, as I did once. And they said, thank you very much. That was it. That was it. Thank you. We have to open up that discussion. I had an idea. How do you do that? How do you have people walk into a meeting that's run efficiently? And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's very good. How do you do it? So the answer I had was this. The meeting goes on as it is a good business meeting, and it is good. At the end of that meeting, the town will provide soda, coffee, danishes, cupcakes. I don't give a darn what it is, but we bring something to this meeting and we create a place where people will say, okay, now let's talk. And this is the people's meeting. We'll talk about each of those issues. Eric will be there, the town manager. He'll report on those issues. Those are the issues that have to be reported on and reported to the select board and to the people themselves. They must be heard. They must know that their opinions are respected. If you walk into a classroom, Steve will agree, and someone says something and you dismiss it, you've lost that person forever. We must respect the people who walk in. We must tell them we respect them. We must invite them in and listen and record what they say. So that was what I was saying. I talk too much, I think.
Nope.
Because of being a teacher, Steve.
Thank you, Catherine.
Getting the public to participate is a time-honored problem. People are busy. People have other things they're doing. And oftentimes, people are just satisfied with the way things are going. They're trusting of the people who are running them. And usually when they're not, we hear from them. We do hear from Bob often. He has things to say and we do listen to him and to others. Things that we have used and continue to use and I think should continue to do. We have an email alert system so people can sign up to get any important information that comes from the town, notices of all town meetings, publications, events that are happening. We have a very robust website. We publish a messenger, both printed and electronic. I don't think it's ever shorter than 10 pages long, and it involves things throughout the community, not just town things. We use Heritage Days, which is championed by our current select board chair, Dennis Price, who also runs a fantastic Facebook page for the town. Through Eric's help and Bill in the background, we use Zoom for all of our meetings, and all committee meetings are now required to be held in person and on Zoom so that the public can participate from wherever they may be. They don't even have to be in Maine. I think a lot of what I take as feedback from the public is what I see in the results of the voting at town meeting. Things are overwhelmingly supported by the town voters. That is the loudest voice, as Steve said, that people can have, is to vote. And when you're consistently getting 60% and over approval ratings on your warrant articles that you're asking for approval, that's a loud response. In response to something Bob said, when you work on the board, you'll find that you have to follow Robert's Rules of Order. That's our basic guidelines. We do run meetings very much as Bob described. There is always time for public comment. We almost never have public comment, but when we do, we always listen. We respond without making any decisions, because the decision is not something to be made on a quick basis. It's something that you take thought with, that you research, and you bring up as a future agenda item. One issue that just recently came to our attention was the speed limit on the South Road and a lot of speeding that's taking place in front of the elementary school. Eric spent a lot of time with this particular resident and a few others about it. We did a study. We've arranged for signs, and this has all happened, I would say, in the space of about 8 weeks. So not everything has to take forever just because it's government. So I do take issue with that we don't listen to people. We do, but just because somebody comes and makes a comment doesn't mean that that's a majority voice. So we try to put things in perspective and bring them forward and discuss them when it's appropriate.
Okay, so let's hold that for a second. Starting with Steve, I think Eric started the last one, but starting with Eric's thought, I have a question about, you have all these projects going on that everybody's very familiar with. Eric mentioned the possibility of ambulance service. So I'm going to ask you a question about what unmet need, capital need, where it would require capital money, not an operating, but a real capital project, whether it's in fulfillment of the comprehensive plan or following up on that idea. Anything else that you think of that the town might want to be thinking about starting into so that it's fulfilled in 5 years? Capital project, just a capital project. Steve.
That's going to be a quick answer, because to be absolutely honest with you, I don't have another idea that I think is really critical. I think we have a lot on our plate right now. We need to pay attention to doing those things and doing them well. And, my thinking on that is that this job, for anybody who's coming into it new, is one where you have to learn on the job. And that's, for me, I think it would be presumptuous to say, well, we should do this right now, because I don't know the finances well enough and know, how these other things are going to turn out. So I would say, no, I don't.
Okay, that's fine. Bob, some capital project that's not underway that would make the town better down the road.
Unfortunately, I have a opinion that's in the opposite direction. I say that the town should roll back all capital expenses for this coming year and possibly for 2. At that point, and that does not include the softball field for the girls. I think that should be, that is not a capital project. It could be accomplished with much less, and it could be done efficiently by a town working together. So capital projects, I think we must not even think about. Now, Steve said and he's right. This is in the future. I'd like to hold off for a time when capital projects become more imperative to us as a town. They talk about broadband. We're talking about satellite systems that deliver broadband for no cost, a minimal cost compared to running fiber optic cable through forests and so on, through trees, and no one knows. They're not unfamiliar with the repair work for a fiber optic cable
I just want to
that
come back
breaks.
to my looking
Okay,
forward to
yes,
not
that's
that.
all.
So,
Yes,
okay.
thank you, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
just trying to keep us on track here, Catherine. Something that isn't underway that you think needs to be taken up, save, make the
That
town
isn't
better,
underway.
or it's minimally underway.
I just want to say that a capital project is, in our town, by definition, is anything that's value is 10,000 and greater. When we built the boys baseball field 10 years ago, that cost us $25,000. A lot of that was in kind and donated money, but still, if the cost is there, it's considered a capital project. So I don't see any way you could build a ball field for the girls for under $10,000. I think one of the key things coming up for our town, and it may or may not fall into capital project, is our winter roads maintenance. We have had 0 bidders for the last 2 years on our winter maintenance contract proposals. And this is becoming an issue. We're not the only town who has this problem. And we're not sure how we're going to work around that. We had a workaround last year. We may have a workaround this year. But that's something that we're going to have to look at. But I agree with Steve. We're in a pretty good place. The select board and especially the budget committee have done a great job with our capital investment planning, so that by saving small amounts each year and by budgeting ahead of time, knowing that in the next year we're going to need a larger amount for expense X or expense Y, we're prepared when we get there so that the tax rate isn't spiking due to not thinking ahead. It's important to keep things like fire trucks rolling. You can only put them off for so long. When you're replacing a 30-year-old truck, if you go to 35 years, it may not be reliable. I think my last comment would be, as Eric said, ambulance service is a big problem in town. We have been assured, and with our new contract by John from Winthrop Ambulance Service, we will have ambulance service in this town. There is no doubt of that. They have a great multi-town backup system where they do get ambulances here, maybe 5 minutes longer. Oftentimes, it's not even that much longer. Doing that would be a huge capital project. And it probably would take several years to implement. We had a great rescue program here many years ago, but it used up the volunteers. It was very time intensive, very psychologically intensive. We just didn't have enough people working in town who could fulfill that need, where they could leave their jobs and respond to calls. So it's a very complex problem, and I think that might be a great thing to look into.
Okay, well, Eric, I sort of took your question and blew it up for everybody, so you can't use that now.
Oh, yes, you can.
Just joking. Is there something, that or something else that you think that we should be thinking about down the road to make Readfield a better place 5-10 years from now?
Well, you said 5-10 years from now. I'm really looking outside the bubble. Natural gas coming into town, sewer, water. These are some of the things that I would like to see. It's a huge project. It's a lot of money. There's grants out there. It's definitely 10 years out, but I think that it's something that we should look into.
Okay, where do you want to go further with this? We're coming up. Okay. So those are some of the questions. I think if the rest of the questions that we've prepared sort of run circles around some of the conversation we've actually had. So rather than repeat ourselves, I would ask if anyone here has a question that, whatever question you ask will be asked to all of them though. So just go ahead, sir. You can ask me and I'll try and repeat it. No, you can ask me and I'll repeat it. So.
How do I raise?
Who is that?
It's the Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz. Okay, you got the instructions.
We're not muted.
52 Mountain View Lane. Mr. Moderator, thank you for recognizing me. I have a question specifically for candidate Itar, and depending on how he answers, I would ask the other board or other prospective candidates to reply. So in that regard, it is inclusive.
Yeah, I
Hopefully
just
that
want
passes
to, you
muster.
can ask me and I'll see if I can frame it so
Okay.
that everybody can
And
answer
I
the same
would,
question.
I would hope, given the fact that I believe my question is germane to the election process and speaks to motivation for candidacy, that you will allow it.
Sure.
So candidate Itar, should you be fortunate enough, and I'm fortunate because I am one of those right now, and I'm not sure it's a blessing. Should you be elected to a seat on the select board and your Millstream project for that board for some sort of a decision on legal matters, as it has in the past on numerous occasions, would you be willing to recuse yourself from discussion and a vote on that matter? And then, Mr. Moderator, depending on how Mr. Itar answers, if he answers in the negative, then I would respectfully ask the other candidates to respond as to whether or not they believe that Mr. Itar should recuse himself.
Okay, so let me, thank you for the question. Let me try to phrase that so we can work through it here. I think you understand that the question really comes down to personal conflicts of interest. So let's frame the question to everyone and not make it a judgment about who answers which way, but just make it a question, if you don't mind, that in your practice as a select person representing the community, and I guess, Bob, actually we start with you for this one, but in your practice, if an issue comes up before the board in which you have a personal interest, there are obviously statutes and rules that apply here, but what's your personal expectation of yourself with respect to considering and judging and deciding that if an issue came up that you have a personal interest in? And I'm not going to define what a personal interest means. It means different things to different people. There's a statute that specifically describes it, but let's just hear how you all think about issues that come before you as representatives of the town and in which you have an interest. I think that may help you. Go ahead, sir.
I think the answer to that's very clear. It's in the MMA, the Maine Municipal Association, legislation and laws that actually guide the governing of the municipal body. You recuse yourself.
So, okay, Catherine, question about personal participation in issues that come before you as a select person in which you have some form of interest.
Yes, I absolutely agree. You need to recuse yourself. I think it's also important to state the reason why you're recusing yourself. And I would also like to add that those are the only issues on which you are allowed to recuse yourself. MMA requires that you have a vote. You don't get to choose to abstain because you don't like an issue or you like an issue. It's your duty as an elected official to participate. Thank you.
Okay. Eric?
I agree. If an issue came up on the animals or anything of that nature, I would have to recuse myself because of the alpacas. Also, if I was fortunate enough to get this position by the voters, I would have to give up my job as the animal control officer because of the conflict of interest. So I agree that you accuse yourself.
Okay. Steve?
I just think that's a super easy question. You need to be transparent in a position like this. And part of that is, letting people know if there's a conflict of interest and then recusing yourself.
So what you're saying is that the questions I ask you are hard and the questions from here are easy. So we should take all the questions from here.
I think maybe we're just starting easy. We'll see what comes next.
How about a low ball, hard ball here? Anybody got a curve ball? Man, right here we have a question. So if you don't mind, he needs to go to the microphone. You can ask me the question and I'll try to find a way to get it passed along.
I'm Lydia Leinbach. I live up the street. And I've heard a couple of candidates talk about cutting parts of the budget. And so I'm just curious what specific parts of the budget you think.
Okay, so we start with Catherine. What would be your favorite place to go? And if you had that, this is a lot harder question, it looks like. But what would you suggest and how would you arrive at that decision?
Well, I think the question was, if you thought the budget needs to be cut, where would you cut it? And I do
Oh, so
not,
let's make that question easier then. Let's not make it judgmental about whether you think it has to be cut. Just let's say if it had to be cut, don't judge whether it needs to be cut. What is on your list of favorite things that you might suggest?
I don't have any favorite things because I try to look at everything equally. One of the biggest budget concerns we had this year was the wage increases. Wage increases were necessary to retain and to find employees in the current situation. Our country has been very much a proponent of having wage increases. And now when the budgets come time, this is when we pay for them. And so the primary thing that's driving this budget increase, both at the school level and here at the municipal side, is the wage increases. I would not choose to cut those. I voted to increase the wages in Readfield. It would have to be a very studied thing to decide where to cut and what could be still accomplished. And I would still suggest, similar to what Steve said earlier, to put things out to the voters and let them reject things that they think are too expensive, because I think we've put together a very responsible budget.
Okay, it's a tightrope, Eric.
I agree with Catherine about the increase in wages. That's very, very important to keep that up in this time and era. I do feel that, again, going back to broadband, a lot of people want it. I haven't heard too much except costs. If there's any way that we can look through the budget and bring the cost down with grants, federal grants, state grants, we need to be able to cut responsibly, not irresponsibly. So I would have to leave it up to the voters to make those decisions. We can bring it forward, but people need to vote on it.
Okay, Steve?
I would definitely agree with Eric's sentiment on that. In general, I think that we'll try to be true to the spirit of your question. If things had to be cut, I don't know what's going to determine that had to. Maybe if you were appointed czar of budget and said things have to be cut, then my feeling would be that to try to find some ways that we can phase in certain parts of the projects. You know, maybe delay building the hard surface courts at the fairgrounds project, or maybe phasing in the broadband. But I don't think that there's any of the priorities that are out there in front of us. I would say these are bad ideas.
So just
But-
build first
but-
base and do second base next
Just,
year.
you know, I mean, well, because you don't know that, I don't believe I said that.
You said phasing.
Well, but phasing like different parts, not half of the softball field.
Bob, sorry, I
I
got
like
carried
it.
away. Bob,
Oh, yes. It's a hard thing. There would be things that I would look at right away. And that, I think the first thing would be the select board increased its pay for the period of time. I think that could be cut immediately in anticipation of hard times for the town. And that would go far to actually saying, we are concerned with you. We can get by. We have 2 incomes or whatever it is. We can get by. The other thing would be any tax gifts given to people for projects that are not essential or emergency in nature.
I just missed one word. What, tax what? Tax? You said not-
Gifts,
Gifts?
yes, grants,
Oh,
gifts,
grants.
yes, to different groups.
Okay.
I would, if they're recreational or something, I would think about that. I would think, if we're talking about things that must be done. And that doesn't mean it's permanent. It means that we've got to look responsibly into the future. Difficult thing, always difficult. But when you look into the future and they're saying, if they're saying that there will be people who will lose their jobs, the interest rates will increase in homes. If you have a variable rate mortgage, if your rate goes from 3 to 5%, that means you're paying $400 more per month on your mortgage. Wait a second. We're talking serious stuff here.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
stop with that question. And Elaine Cates is on the line. It's on Zoom. There's a voice there's a mysterious voice casting over the room. What was the question?
Elaine Cates, I believe, has a question. Is that correct, Bill?
Yes. Okay, can we hear you, Elaine?
Yes, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
It's a good question.
Can you hear me?
Why don't you find the question and let us know? We'll look in here for another. I'll go fishing for more questions. Yes, sir.
Muted.
Bill,
Hello?
we're going to take a question and you can figure that out.
Oh, just send it by chat.
I did.
Oh, boy. This is looks like.
Can you speak? Just a second. We just have to resolve a question. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry. Fiber.
Would the members of the select board, if elected, would they consider an alternative such as Starlink, which has very low latency, don't need all that quick infrastructure, and probably just serve each individual household specifically that was in need versus the whole town. So you don't need to buy a Ferrari for everybody in town. Just get the person that doesn't have a car, a nice little car. So Starlink, very effective. So the question is, would you consider Starlink wireless versus fiber?
Okay. So I think we start with Catherine this time. I've lost track. I think Bob asked the last one. No.
No, you started Captain last time, I think. didn't you?
Okay.
No, I think we started with Bob.
Did you?
I don't care where we start.
I'm
It's
going to
fine.
flip
Yeah.
I'm going to flip a coin and start with Eric. Okay. So the question is not necessarily given where we are, but if changes in technology came along before or during the period of time that your product was in place, how would you bring that up and consider it to be an alternative available to the community?
I don't know enough about Starlink, but I have heard.
But
good
just
things.
generically, let's talk generically.
All right, and generically, if there was an alternative that would be equal to or greater than, then I would pursue that with a committee and find out more about it.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, I don't know if that particular alternative was considered by the committee or not. I just know kind of what the end result is right now. My question would be, when I think about that, I mean, there's tremendous advances in satellite technology. They are launching like satellites the size of shoeboxes that have amazing capabilities. And so, maybe there is something out there, but that's a maybe for me. I don't know. But would you consider it? Of course, you'd have to consider it, right? Because it's another possible option. And, if you're thinking, well, we want to try to be forward thinking in whatever we do, then that would be part of the calculus. But I couldn't tell you what part. I don't know enough about it or about the broadband system as it's currently proposed, at least technologically.
Bob, something comes along in your midst of it, can you find a way to accommodate it?
Absolutely. Satellite systems, just in this past year, Amazon is launching 1,000 satellites. Elon Musk has 2,500 for broadband service. This is an explosively new and cheap way of communication, and it will be proliferated over the next 10 years, rather than a 20-year guaranteed payment for a fiber line that will be obsolete. We used them 40 years ago.
Okay, thank you. I just want to stick with the question, but I appreciate it. Catherine, you got the last word on that.
We've been working on the broadband project for 3 years plus. We have considered Starlink. There are multiple issues. One, it is not cheaper. It's $500+ to install. It's over $100 per month. It does not reach every location, especially in wooded.
Okay, I
and-
want to, hold on, I want to stick with the question. The question isn't whether we're doing the right thing or not. The question is if something came along, how would you propose to accommodate it?
I thought the question was about using Starlink and satellite
No, it's the
technology.
question isn't, the question isn't using that technology. The question I asked, which is my question, interpreting his question, was if something came along in the midst of implementation or after, how would you accommodate that? This has nothing to do with whether you're going to go forward with broadband or not. I'm only narrowing it down to if something comes along, how could you accommodate considering integrating it? Or would you just say, we're down the road? Can't do it.
Once we pull the trigger and we're installing the network, then that's what we're doing. We have considered things as they have come up, and we would still consider to do that. But we would be looking for technology that provides the same service, the same level of service, the same security of service.
Okay, that's a good answer. So I want to go, Bill, to the man in the moon. Could you find the question from our caller?
I've asked her to put it in chat. Can you ask her to put it in chat?
Elaine, can you hear me?
Can you put it in chat? We can't see your question.
Evidently, we can't
Hey,
hear
I-
you, Elaine. So can
Can
you
you
write
hear
your
me?
question in the chat box?
I did. It's there.
I don't know why it's not working.
Okay, well, on behalf of everyone who's here and there, we'll have to move on. I'm sorry. So we're going to bring this to an end. You're going to get
They-
2
you
minutes
can't run
or
a
less
Zoom
if you want to
session and you're
wrap
gonna
up why
run
you wanted to be a
broadband?
select person. And then we're going to go to the school board. So I think Steve comes back to you by rotation.
Sounds good. So I don't need 2 minutes, I don't think. For me, it's the biggest thing that I feel is we need to continue to work on. There's a lot of the mechanics of government, of developing good sound budgets, the forward thinking, all that stuff. But my biggest focus is I put a little thing at the bottom of my couple of signs I put up there that says, we are all in this together. And that is the biggest theme that I want to run on, is the idea of finding common ground. I mean, there are tremendous differences in the students that I have at school from one end of the spectrum to the other in all possible ways. And as a teacher, you try to find ways to respect all of them, to listen to all of them, to give them all a voice. And I just believe super strongly that's what I want to do as on the select board, is to give people a voice, to realize that we really do have way more in common than we have differences. We have differences, obviously, but I think we have way more in common. And listening to each other, getting to know each other is how you make those commonalities become more obvious. So it's the search for common ground.
Did they
Thank
have
you,
some
Steve.
kind of phone number for people who were not doing it on?
Yeah.
They can't hear us.
The question again.
They-
So just to wrap up your position, wrap up your candidacy.
Okay. Yeah, wrap it up. I said that there were several things that I thought were important. Rolling back,
What's that?
Did you, he just said something from behind.
We have the question on the screen, but we can't read it, Bill. It's not bold enough.
Sorry.
Okay, so Bob, why don't you
I heard
just
the
keep
voice
going and
from
we'll try
behind.
and figure this
Okay.
out.
Elaine Cates, I'm sorry. Sometimes select boards have to deal with cultural issues. I would like to hear the candidates respond to a situation in which a small but vocal group of residents would like to ban certain books in our community library.
Okay, so we'll come back to the wrap up in a minute. So Catherine, as briefly as you can, how would you, as a select person, steer the community to deal with an issue of people who are interested in selecting books for the library, one way or the other?
I would.
One way or the other?
I would entrust that to the library board of trustees, who handle all of the library issues.
Okay. Eric?
I would also go to the people that really know better than I, the library trustees, and take their recommendation and bring it to the select board. And we could bring it up to the people in town, because I think everybody should have a vote on all cultural issues. It's not you, me, and them, it's us. We are us, and
Okay,
we're
Steve,
together.
thank you. Steve?
Again, I think you have to start at the level of the library trustees because they're the folks who are, we trust to do that, make those kind of decisions. You start there, but you also make sure that the folks who have those concerns are listened to.
Okay, Bob?
I don't know the library trustees. I've worked in university most of my life. I believe free speech is essential in this country. Essential. Any kind of censorship is difficult at best. And there are specific Supreme Court rulings concerning censorship. I think those should be the only ones that should be operable. On the other hand, children's sections should be monitored carefully and so on. But I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, great. Thank you for the call. I'm sorry we had so much complications getting your question. So you were in the midst of wrapping up your candidacy and then we'll move to Karen.
Yes.
Catherine, sorry.
Yes. Rolling back spending, it's important. Community setting up and creating, restoring our community. The restoration of community dialogue at the transfer station, very important. And lastly, I listened to everybody here. I've known Steve for years, bright, good man. We need a board that speaks to a new dialogue. And for that reason, I ask people to vote for Eric Johnson. And I think that he brings that dialogue, just a different way of thinking from the people. And I think that he has this sense of practicality. Yes, and I like it. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
In closing, I would ask that people look for the facts of all the situations that we've been talking about tonight and not the rumors and the interpretations. There is a lot of information on the Readfield Town website. There's a Readfield Fiber page. There's a Community Fairgrounds Park page, and it details all of the plans as they are laid out. There are grants coming in applications. The Alfond program is looking to, fairgrounds people are applying to the Alfond, I don't know what they're called.
Foundation.
Their grant farm anyway, for funding for the fields. We can apply for federal grants now because the rules have changed for the broadband. So Axiom, who's the company that we're looking to go with, has just been awarded a lot of money in grants. The town of Leeds just got half of their project in grants, and they're a town very similar to Readfield. We could be looking at receiving up to half
I
of
just
our
want to keep
money.
it to you being a
I
select
know.
person.
Well, this is my project.
Okay.
I think it's really important to have diversity on the board, and we have it now, and we have always had it. We have lots of discussion and we work together, and I want to continue to do that. I think I have a lot to offer the town. As new people come in, I have some institutional memory that can be useful. I think that I'm fair and that I listen to people and that I am also smart, and I would ask that you vote for me. And I think that we're looking at two rather different approaches between the four candidates, and that you pick the approach that you think will run your town the best way.
Thank you. Eric, you can have the last word of the last word.
Bob, thank you very much. That means a lot coming from you. I feel that if I am elected by the people, it'll be, everybody's word will be heard. It'll be old school. Nobody will be shunned. Nobody will be turned away. Every vote counts. This year, get out and vote. please. Absentee ballots, it's a long list. If you want an absentee ballot, take it home, look it over, do it in your own time. Please, please vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this. We're going to take a very short break, and then we'll start school board, which I don't even know how many candidates are here, but we'll take a break now for 5 or 6 minutes reposition. Thank you for this part of the meeting. My name's Doug Stevenson. I'm the moderator, I guess we'd call it, for this. And hopefully you will give enough knowledge to the people that you want to, that they'll choose to elect you and move forward with a great school. Is that clear? Everybody fine? And as questions start, we will go left to right. Each question starts with a successor. So we all get the same question. So he asked me to start on the left so he can run his cameras correctly. So we'll start with you, Travis.
Thank you. My name is Travis Frotton. I've lived in Readfield with my wife Danica for about 10 years now. We have 2 daughters who attend Readfield Elementary School, a 7 and a 9-year-old. Previous to purchasing our first home here in Readfield, I actually grew up just across the lake here on Maranacook Lake on the Winthrop side for about 25 years. Prior to that, I attended Winthrop High School, all the Winthrop schools, of course, and then after that, I headed off to University of Maine at Orono and achieved a bachelor's degree in business management, and then thereafter went on to graduate school and received an MBA from Thomas College in Waterville. Professionally, I've been a commercial loan officer here in community banking here in Maine for about 10 years, just over 10 years. 15 years total community banking here in Maine, starting in college. So I really understand sort of the community involvement that the entire state has, and I'm very passionate about that. This community is terribly important to my wife and I. One example I can give is that the office where I work is over an hour away. So when I drive down to the office, it's an hour each way, and my wife and I have never considered relocating or moving. And so I feel as though that's a testament to how committed we are to this community and bringing our girls up, our daughters up in this community. So I'm very passionate about that. That's primarily the reason I'm running. Our 2 daughters are really my inspiration. There's of course been a number of topics over the past couple difficult years that probably have brought a lot of us here tonight. Our daughters have actually asked me to sort of seek this position, which is almost makes me emotional, frankly, and it's very inspiring. Not only our daughters, but a lot of our friends and family have encouraged me to do this. I have pretty extensive past board experience already in my life. I've served on 4 other sort of local nonprofit organizations. I'm the current chairperson at a great nonprofit organization in the Lewiston Auburn area, Community Concepts Finance Corporation. Very committed to that organization and what they stand for. So it's a role that I hopefully look forward to having a chance to serve the community doing, and that's really why I find myself here tonight. So appreciate all you in attendance and everybody else in the cyber world, if you will.
Thank you. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Bickerman. I'm a product of what was the nation's largest public school system. I came to Maine in 1977 to work in the Maine Attorney General's office, and I did that for 10 years. I then spent over 30 years in private law practice in various places and capacities. My wife Karen and I moved to Readfield into Thunder Castle Road in 1981, and we're still here, same place. One of the things we considered at the time we moved, we were living in an apartment in Hollowell. At the time, we were told by several people what a good school system existed in the Maranacook district. School Union 42 at the time, wasn't it? Anyway, that proved to be true. my kids, our kids, born in 1982 and 1985, both had very good educations. Our daughter wound up being valedictorian of her high school class. Our son said he was an above average student, and now I choose to believe him. They both turned out fine. But I know as a parent, I dealt with the school bureaucracy both in good times and in not so good times, and it can be frustrating, it can be difficult. And there's a need for communication and as much transparency as possible. What motivated me to run for this is, well, I am basically retired now and I have more spare time. I've sat on a lot of boards and commissions. In particular, I've been on the Readfield Board of Appeals for about 14 years. I was chair of the board for about 10 years. That job is a pretty easy job. You know, we can go years between hearings. When we have hearings, it's challenging, but the rest of the time, it's nothing. So I have some spare time. I was motivated by press reports of what happened last summer before the school year when the board had to take up the difficult issue of masking in schools. And based on the media reports, which may or may not be entirely accurate, I was unhappy with some of the things that were said by our representative on the subject. I know the board subsequently reversed its position and went to masking. Now it's optional, of course. So now we're dealing with an ongoing problem. I see public schools serving an essential function in our society in terms of social interaction, not just learning, but also mixing of people from various backgrounds. And I'll do whatever I can to support public schools. At the same time, I think we need to do a better job, not necessarily specific to this school or this school union, but generally public education needs to do a better job teaching kids the duties and the privileges of citizenship in our Republican form of government, in our representative democracy. I think what's become obvious over the past few years is that many, many people in this country don't understand how government works and don't have a clue. And we should be doing a better job teaching kids the basics of government and democracy. And so that's one of the things I would hope if I were on the board, I would stress to our educators.
So let me ask you to save some of the rest of your thoughts for
Sure.
some of the other questions and work them in so we can get the introductions down here. So just for now, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
So it's a Cristobal, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I go by Chris, but
Okay,
I'm
Chris,
sure it'll
Thanks.
show up on the ballot as Cristobal Alvarado. My wife, Jen, and I moved here to Readfield, I guess almost 13 years ago now. We own our home over on Gordon Road. And I guess what inspired me to run, as like probably some of my colleagues, is the experiences of the last 2 years and how that's affected our 4 kids who are all up and down the levels of education here in the main system. My oldest son, Sebastian, is going to graduate from Orono next winter. My daughter, Avery, is becoming a nurse at Husson. My son, Luke, is up at the main school of science and mathematics up in Limestone. And my daughter, Isa, gets a wonderful experience here in the grammar school. She's a type 1 diabetic, and one of the reasons we transferred her is because of the services that are available in the public school system as opposed to the parochial school system. So, you know, we're very appreciative of that. And I think that in general, I don't think there's any group of people who have suffered more over the last 2 years than our kids. You know, I think we're all seeing, you know, the loss of learning that's being documented and the disadvantages we're going to help them overcome. And I think, you know, there's a cliche that in Mandarin, the character for crisis is the same as for opportunity. And, you know, it's a cliche, but every cliche has some truth. And I think there's an awful lot of money that's now being appropriated to schools to help overcome these deficiencies. And I think it's a prime opportunity for us to think of creative ways that we can make the educational experience much better and much more powerful for our kids and help them overcome all those things that they've had to suffer from the last couple of years. So I'm a retired physician. I'm currently a law student. I have a lot of time and a lot of energy. Last year, I spent a year as the parent representative for my son Luke's school, the main school of science and mathematics, for the strategic planning committee. And I think it opened my eyes to a lot of the opportunities that exist that we can certainly bring here to Maine with just a little bit of imagination. So in closing, I would just like to say, I think the most important role of the representatives is to truly be a representative. And one of the things I would promise to do is to be available to talk to constituents. I think one of the things that was frustrating to me as a constituent at the school board meetings as they were run over the last year is, the constraint that you have of having to speak within 3 minutes. And, it just, I think we need to have much more free flowing discussions for important topics. And that's something I would like to bring, as well as the ability to deliver that by having enthusiasm and energy. So thank you.
So did the 3 minutes fit into your needs here tonight? Sorry. I just want to dredge up a question from the past meeting. I think it might be interesting to hear what you think about it. And you can keep this to just one sentence if you want to, but the prior panel was asked a question about basically censorship of books, but we turned it into how, as a governing entity, would the school committee, how do you think that they should view not just the censorship of books, but any opportunity either way about books in the school system, not in the community, in the school system? Let's just start with that as a fun place to start, because it's a good question. Peter, start with you.
To my mind, a key part of education is to learn outside of your experience, to be forced to learn things that you don't know. In 11th grade, I was thinking about this because we've been hearing these reports from other parts of the country about attempts to restrict what students should read or learn so they won't be disturbed. I don't think that should be the standard. As disturbance as part of education. In 11th grade, in my public high school, in 11th grade English, we were reading books. We were reading Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Native Son by Richard Wright. We were reading Poets of the Harlem Renaissance. My school's at the time was about 90% white. And so we didn't know many African Americans. I didn't. And I learned a lot about how they view their lives through those books, through those works. And obviously there are certain things that need to be age appropriate. I understand. We don't want obscenity in school, pornography rather, but really we have to be very careful about avoiding censorship based on viewpoint.
Okay, great. Chris, in both ways,
I
bringing
think,
books in or keeping books out. And we're talking just books here for this conversation.
so I think if an issue like that came up, I would probably err on the side of being more of a free speech absolutist, as Elon Musk might say, or somebody who's certainly in favor of significant free speech for many of the reasons that were articulated in that. I think public schools have traditionally been seen throughout the entire 20th century as engines for democracy, that we are educating future citizens. And the only way for future citizens to be able to make critical decisions when they become adults is to be able to face difficult issues and come at it from multiple sides and yet still have respect for their fellow countrymen. And I think that training begins in our schools. And so I think we give a very poor example to our children when we have a low threshold for, as you would say, content or viewpoint discrimination. I think that we have to have a high bar for that. There are certainly times when it's appropriate. And the Supreme Court, as my colleague would know much better than I, has ruled on that throughout the 20th century, that things that are, incitements to violence or other things like that, are certainly reasons for, putting restrictions. But I think you have to have a very high bar for that, because we're preparing our kids to be citizens, and we want them to be able to face difficult issues and grapple with them.
Thank you. Travis?
Yeah, I think we've got some good groupthink going here. I would echo both Peter and Cristobal's sort of comments around any sort of, I personally believe any sort of censorship of free speech is very dangerous. I think my friends and family would tell you this is right up my alley, and I'm quite passionate about it. So I would leave it sort of vague like that, because without knowing any sort of specific instance of what book we might be talking about or what certain speech we're talking about. I think it's difficult for me to opine on that at this point, but I can say, sort of getting back to maybe your one sentence response, in general, I think censorship of free speech is a slippery slope.
Well, I'm really glad you took more than one sentence because it was a much deeper conversation, and it certainly is a good conversation. Appreciate all your thought on that. So Chris, we'll start with you on this next question, which was, are there, I know you hinted at it, and you've actually all hinted at it and why you wanted to run, but is there something specific that you would like to see your candidacy or your actual election to the position that you would like to see a change or an improvement over the next year or two to make the school system or the governance of the school system run better in your point of view? And
So, sure, I think maybe to be a little specific, I talked about crises lending themselves to being opportunities. And I think one of the opportunities that we missed over the last couple of years is we had a really great potential to just focus like a laser on something like childhood obesity, for instance, and how important it is for kids to get outside and exercise and get out in the sun. And I think we have so much opportunity and so many resources here in Maine, living in such open spaces and having wonderful summers. I would love to see the school aggressively expand into summer educational opportunities. And I say that from a point of personal observation of that, because my youngest daughter does have some speech issues and some learning delay issues, and she's benefited tremendously from working in the summers so that she doesn't fall back and she's hitting the ground running. And I think that's a broader principle that I think we all should abstract from our recent experience of the last 2 years. There's a lot that we can do to foster things outside, and we should take advantage of that, especially since we have those resources here.
Travis?
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 things that I find myself being very passionate about, and perhaps because it hits home so much in our household with our 2 young daughters in the elementary school. But the first topic for me is sort of finding any way to preserve normalcy for our children in the school systems. When I say normalcy, I'm of course talking about sort of pre-COVID, if you will. I understand that certain things have probably changed and adapted, maybe permanently, but it's sort of anything I can do. I won't make any promises. I've never been a big fan of candidates making promises. I think it's difficult to really follow through on. And you won't hear me do that tonight, but just finding a way to work with the board and all the teachers, the administrators to sort of get back to normalcy for our children. They need it. They deserve it. It's been a long run, and I'm incredibly passionate about that. Sort of along that same line, teacher relations are very important to me. I didn't get a chance to say in my intro or even my letter that went out in the newsletter, but my mother was a teacher for 33 years. So I'm the son of an educator, a longtime educator. She retired a few years ago, but I sort of have that background and that sounding board with my mother. And I've had a number of conversations with her. And she was a terribly devoted teacher. And so teacher relations, I think have really deteriorated over the past couple of years. In particular, I think it's one of the worst takeaways from COVID and some of the issues we've had in the school systems. And anything I can do to sort of restore some of those relations with the teachers and work with the board and the administration to really get sort of the parent and teacher relations in a better place. I find myself being pretty passionate about that. And then it sounds like I'm running for class president here, but school lunches, truly, it is sort of a topic I'm quite passionate about. I think my wife and I are very fortunate to find ourselves in a situation where everybody has their own sort of understanding of good nutrition. I think my wife and I have a pretty good understanding. Maybe I'm biased, but I would say our daughters are very lucky in that we are able to provide sort of healthy nutrition and food to them. That's not every child's situation. And so I do think there's a lot of work we can do at the schools. To me, I'm most passionate about the elementary school, of course, right now. I know there's been a lot of relief money that's flowed in from the federal government. I don't see why we couldn't put that towards nutrition. And Cristobal talked about childhood obesity. I don't know enough to opine on that, but I do know that we should be setting our children up well, from the start in the elementary school system with good nutritional meals. And honestly, the things that are offered, I can't say we're quite there yet. So I do think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Peter?
Even before the pandemic, I heard from a couple teachers that the level of respect that they were able to receive from parents and other students had deteriorated over the years. I think that's a serious problem. I think it's a societal problem. It's hitting teachers in this context. People seem free to be disrespectful and frankly rude and obnoxious for a variety of reasons. And we have to work on that. The board, we can set a tone as a board by being respectful as much as possible. However, one thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is the fact that because of the pandemic, we've had interruptions, so many interruptions in school. Since September of last year, for example, the middle school has had 13 COVID days, remote learning, 13 days because of COVID. The high schools had 8 remote learning days because of COVID. We all know remote learning is certainly better than no learning, but it's not an adequate equivalent. It just can't, because of a variety of reasons, including the teenage mind and the short attention spans and the fact that when you do remote learning, the least motivated students are the ones who are missing the most. And so we need to keep kids in the classroom as much as we can. And then the question is, well, how do you accomplish that in a pandemic era? And of course, here's where I would lose votes by some of my suggestions. But one of the things that shocked me, this is a quote now from the superintendent, vaccine requirements for employment in RSU 38 are non-existent. I don't understand why that is. I understand that there are collective bargaining considerations for teachers, but I think to the extent that a school board can mandate vaccinations against contagious diseases on the part of employees, they should do so. And I'll stop here because I know I'm running out of time.
Okay, great, thanks. So I want to turn to we can take questions if anyone has here, because I don't want to go too long just on my list, but you had a question, sir? Well, I don't mind taking it right now if you want, because I'm working my lists and you may have something better. Well, just let me know your name because I don't know.
My name's Mark Roscoe. I live on Harmony Hills Road. I've got 2 kids in the school system, one at the elementary, one at the middle school. I'm asking now because it does sort of dovetail with what the candidates are discussing. I would be curious to hear, now that we're 2 years into this pandemic, I was present at a lot of those school board meetings, the earlier ones that you read about. I would like to hear each candidate's feelings about the appropriateness of the school board's reaction, now that we have hindsight, and the effectiveness of the actions that they were taking, what your opinions are about those 2 points.
Can I turn that a little bit more into a forward-looking?
In any way you want to manipulate that, be my guest.
Okay, because I know there's a benefit of looking back, but I just want to see where we're going forward.
The reason I framed it in that way is because at the time there was a lot of conversation about, well, we don't know where this is going to go. Well, we don't know what's going to happen. And there were people who did predict fairly accurately what ultimately did transpire. So, but if you would like to rephrase
Well, I'd
that,
like
that's
to
totally
just
fine with me.
rephrase it a little bit and say that we've all been through something nobody expected, and there was a lot of uncertainty. So let's frame this in the context of decision-making and uncertainty, in extreme uncertainty, just to get a real flavor for where you view. I think, Travis, we're going to start with you, by the way, so you can think about this longer. I'll talk longer to give you more time. But I think the question really is, as a governing entity faced with something that you've never seen before, what's a rational response given that it's a public setting? And I'm not going to say it was a pandemic. I don't know what it is, but just think of something in your mind that we've never seen before. How do you react to it? It could be anything, but you know the context of the question, at least. It was something that nobody'd seen. How do you guide a school, especially through an event like that? It's a really hard question. I'm sorry. I'm happy.
It's easier to talk about COVID. Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I guess it would depend on sort of what's out there for information. If there's any past experience with a similar event. I hate to use COVID as a reference, but there was sort of past experiences. It certainly wasn't the first global pandemic that, you know, mankind has been dealt with. So to move away from COVID, if there is, you know, a past experience with a similar situation, certainly rely on some of the data or the outcomes of that situation. Listen to your constituents. I think it's very important to sort of listen to the, you know, the parents and the folks amongst the town, and sort of gauge what they'd like to see done. And then of course, work with the administration on kind of what their thoughts are. And then if there's other governing bodies, whether it's the state or the federal government that sort of has to weigh in, and we have to consider those, of course, consider that. But it's sort of a difficult question for me to answer. I'm very analytical, and it's tough for me to kind of operate in that space. So I
You
apologize.
never know what's going to get thrown at you in the life that I think it's a question that we could go a long ways with sometimes. So I appreciate you asking it. But Peter, any ideas? When you're faced with something you've never seen before as a public school board member, how would you guide the organization to address the challenge?
The question, in a sense, is so broad that it's hard to answer, but I think one of the things you do as a board member is to seek out people with superior knowledge to you. So if it's a health issue, you talk to doctors or epidemiologists if it's a contagious disease issue. If it's something else, you know, you speak. For example, we had an incident many years ago, didn't involve my kids, but as well, my daughter was still in the high school at the start of the Iraq War about posting of messages on the board. And there, I believe the school principal and the superintendent should have spoken to a lawyer or two about the First Amendment, because they didn't. So I think you need to speak to people who know more than you do, and then not just seek consensus in your group, seek as much public input as you can, be respectful of the fact there are going to be divergent views. You can't please everybody, but you can listen to everybody.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
I think I would echo much of what has been said, but I would add that whenever anyone's confronted with a difficult problem, I think that the natural human tendency is to fall back on what you do know and what you're comfortable with. You know, having been trained for 25 years as a chest surgeon, what I would probably fall back on to is the scientific method. And what the scientific method tells us, and certainly when we're looking at a patient or looking at a difficult legal problem or however it is, I think you want to make sure that you do get sort of all points of view, but you also want to always be questioning what you think you know. And I think what we need to do whenever we have a question that comes to us is say, well, if we think we know this now, as more information comes up, how do we change what we think we know? And I do want to point out, with all due respect to Peter, a point of obvious distinction between Peter and myself. I will never, ever be somebody who stands for a vaccine mandate for anybody. I think one of the critical mistakes that was made was pushing vaccination for our children, because I think as information is evolving now, at the time, that seemed like a good decision. But as information is evolving now, we're finding out a lot of problems with the way Pfizer ran their trial. We're finding out a lot of problems with the way people are maybe getting sick after being multiply vaccinated. And I think part of what we need to do, we can't castigate decisions that were made in the past, but we are obligated to make sure that we think about those things as we make decisions in the future. And I think to say anything that we would need a mandate now, I think is not looking at the data that has come to the fore and appropriately questioning what we thought was true in the past. So to give one guiding principle is to always be skeptical and always be cynical and always be humble in what you think you know. And that generally helps get you through a bad problem.
Okay, thank you. Good question. Yeah. Yes, you have to go to the microphone.
Burgoyne, and I was a career educator for about 40 years. In the last 12 years at Maranacook, and I retired in 2018. I am deeply concerned about the lack of numbers of people going into the teaching profession. I'm deeply concerned about the turnover that we've had in the teaching profession. I think you would agree that a school is only as strong as the professional staff that is working in the building. I would be interested to hear from you about what your ideas might be or opinions, or how you might propose teacher recruitment and retention. Should you be elected as a member of the board, what would you advocate for to ensure that teaching and learning is still a priority and that we have the highest quality people working for our children?
Thank you, Barbara. So Peter, we start with you. The question is how you attract, retain, and properly keep the credentials going of teachers in the school. Teachers are the heart of the school. So,
And of course, they are the heart of the school. And one of the problems, I think, with contemporary public education, as well as a lot of other things in our society, is we have too many layers of administration and not enough direct aid, direct providers. Arguably, it's happened in medicine too, though. Chris may have a different view. I don't know. But I think one way is first as a school board member, talking to teachers, finding out what they see as the problem. What are the potential solutions? There have been historically, over the course of time, pay has improved. Whether it's kept up, whether it's keeping up now, I doubt with current inflation, but I think in the recent past, there have been pay increases. I don't know whether pay is the major drawback now or the major disincentive. I think it has a lot to do with, what I sort of alluded to earlier, the disrespect with which many teachers are accorded, the lack of appreciation for what they do.
okay.
So I don't think it's not an easy solution, but I think we can be as school board members, we can and should be supportive as much as possible. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. One of the things that we grappled with when I was the parent representative on my son's high school strategic planning committee was exactly that problem, because up in Limestone, Maine, which is 5 hours north of here, very difficult to attract, younger teachers, and people who maybe don't already have a family. And those are the types of teachers who may be most likely to teach, at a magnet high school for a couple of years. And so I think you have to start to be a little creative. I think that you should allow people from all walks of life who have something to give to maybe consider teaching. I know that's something myself I considered when I had to stop operating. I decided to go to law school instead. That was another thing, that you can always do, I think. And then there are a lot of people in our community who contribute in that way. I think on the flip side, if you're really going to solve that problem, you have to approach it as a long-term problem. And the way to solve the problem long-term is to excite people to being teachers when they're young. How many of us decided what we wanted to do when we were older because we got inspired by somebody when we were in 3rd or 5th grade, or that's what the beauty of teachers are, is that they inspire students. And so I think if we give opportunities for students who may be attracted to being educators as adults early on, to do internships or, to talk about it, maybe an integrated vision of how our school district can grow. If we improve our summer opportunities and summer enrichment courses, we can give opportunities to juniors and seniors at the high school to instruct the little ones or instruct the middle schoolers and get and see if they would like to be teachers, and maybe inspire them and give them opportunities to succeed going forward as they go to college and into adulthood. So I think as long as we think about things like that, I think there are a lot of opportunities. And I think the really wonderful thing about the next couple of years is the downside of the pandemic means that the upside is that there's a lot of support from the federal and state government coming to education to try to help that. And I think we need to be appropriate stewards for those funds and make sure that they're used efficiently and effectively, and there's no waste, and we take advantage of this opportunity.
Thank you. Travis?
Yeah, I think Cristobal stole my thunder a little bit, but I agree. I was gonna start out by saying I do think it starts with young folks, and to me it's sort of rebuilding those teacher relations, I think is where it starts. The respect for teachers, I think a lot of it can be done at home as well with parents and their students, and really just, making the position as a public educator a respectable position. And I also, although I'm analytical, I also think outside the box. So to me, to attract sort of young talent in today's world is a little different than it was, as we all know, maybe 20, 30 years ago. So really trying to think of what what's important to folks in their in their high school years and when they're in college. But you really got to sort of hit them before they go off to college. But if we can find a way to sort of take advantage of all of our beautiful natural setting here in central Maine, I think we could really attract some young educators coming out of college. Whether it's setting up like a fund for maybe a year of free housing or something for new educators that agree to come to our school system, if we're really in a bind, something like that. But just thinking outside of the box, and also preserving a lot of the extracurricular activities. I think it's important when teachers also coach as well. I think that's important too, and can be motivating and inspiring. So.
Yeah, I thought you were leading to houseboats on Marinacook for housing. And you almost got there.
I might be down for that too.
You can lead the final question and then we'll wrap this up. So thank you.
My name is Rick Wilson. I live up the street on Main Street. And I too am a retired educator, having spent 28 years in this district, 20 of years as a principal at Manchester Elementary School. So I want to say, first of all, how impressed I am with the level of candidates that we have here. I mean, we've had some lean years in Readfield in terms of running for school board, and I'm very impressed with the quality of the three folks here tonight, and I'm sure the fourth person as well. So thank you for your willingness to step forward. When I used to interview teachers, and one of my last questions to them is hoping they'd done their homework, and I'd ask them, what was the strength of the school? Why did they want to come teach at my school? Or our school. So I would say to you, what do you think is a great strength of our school district that you would freely share if you were at a meeting of fellow board members and you would want to be like a cheerleader for our school district? So what are you aware of that's a great strength that we have already in our district?
Okay, well, thanks, Rick. Chris, we start with you. I'm not even going to reframe the question. It's just a straight out question.
Oh, no, sure. And I have to say, because I have 4 children up and down the school system, there are some things I can really point to that are strengths of our school district. And I see Mr. DeAngelis back there. I want to point out to him and recognize him. He was the cross-country coach here for, was it 4 decades or something? And my son, Sebastian, when we initially moved back here to Maine, I'd moved to Connecticut for a period to take care of my parents or be closer to my parents when they had started to get sick, but we moved back here. And Sebastian, moved into the high school and going into his junior year, and he went on to the cross-country team, and Mr. DeAngelis, took him in, and everybody treated him like family, even though he was a new person here. And it was really a wonderful experience for him. My daughter Avery had a very similar experience on the downhill team. And then I'll also say that my daughter Isa, I grew up as a Catholic, and I went to Catholic school when I was little. And when my kids were little, we sent them to St. Michael's. Actually, my son Luke, who's up in Limestone, graduated from St. Michael's. But my daughter, she went there, and they were very nice. I mean, they're great schools. I really do love Catholic schools. But when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and really needed a nurse full time and needed somebody who could actually take care of her and take responsibility, because that's actually a big deal. It's a 24/7 type of job. And I've been very fortunate. My wife's a nurse. And so, that was very easy for us. But, sending her to school is always a little bit of a concern. And one of the great things about the school district is how much they've been able to supply from that point of view. And then also from the point of view of her speech pathologies and the special ed type programs that she greatly benefits from. And, those are things that I think we should all be thankful of. We have a very good tax base here. And I think we have a community of people that, really do look out for each other. And that's one of the reasons I love living in Maine. I grew up in New York, and it's very, very different from Maine. I really like being up here. And I think that, that's part of the reason I want them for the school board is to help make it a better place and help the next generation of children, have those same benefits.
Okay, great. Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, good question. I appreciate the question. I would say that our community involvement is very inspiring here. We all sort of come out as a community for certain, certain things amongst the town. I would say our extracurricular activities, I mentioned I went to Winthrop. There are many more opportunities here. Although I'm very proud of sort of the athletics and other extracurricular activities in addition to just sports that I played and did at Winthrop. We have many more opportunities here. I might offend some of my friends still left over in Winthrop, but not afraid to say that. We truly do. I think our daughters will have many more opportunities here, not only educationally, but also sort of outside the classroom here than they would have if we would have stayed in Winthrop, for example. So I'm very appreciative of that, and I'm sort of excited for our girls' future here. So thank you, Peter.
I think we're blessed with highly motivated teachers and very handsome physical facilities for the most part. A college friend of mine came up to visit me way back in the 80s, and I took him up to the high school. And he said, he teaches at Seton Hall Prep in New Jersey. And he said, you don't know what you have here. This looks like a private school. I mean, this is so handsome, and you have all these fields. And again, when you come from a more urban area, you know how rare that is in other parts of the country to have these kinds of facilities. I think we have opportunities now. One of the things, this may be a little off point, but one of the things I wanted to point out is that now in this year's state budget, for the first time, the state is fulfilling its promise to fund basic education at 55%, which is what the people voted for back in 2004. So there is, thanks in part to federal COVID relief and the state's obligation, we have some resources, and we can apply those. Let's hope we can apply them wisely and in a way that's sustainable.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your questions. And I said I'll give you a couple of minutes if you choose to wrap up on your candidacy. And I agree, we're blessed to have a great candidates here, and I hope no matter what happens, you all can find a way to stay involved in your passion for the school system, because it's really important. But Travis, I'm sorry to start with you before. Now we'll start with you again, so you can wrap this up.
Yeah, it's okay. I appreciate it. Thanks for everybody that turned out again here in the room and then on Zoom. Yeah, I'll just keep it short, but I'll just summarize in saying that, again, you didn't hear me promise anything tonight. I think it's very difficult to sort of make promises without really being involved in something and really understanding all the dynamics, which I certainly don't pretend to do today. But I think my friends and family and those that know me well would tell you that I'm very committed and passionate. Anything I do, my wife says to a fault, because truly anything I do, whether it's playing cards with somebody or volunteering somewhere, I give it my full commitment and really go full speed ahead. So I wouldn't do it this opportunity if I'm elected in. It wouldn't be any different from any other task that I've really put my mind to in my entire life. So appreciate all the Readfield residents who are willing to sign my nomination papers. Just want to thank them again for this opportunity. Without them, I wouldn't be here. I'm very passionate about it, not only for our daughters, and I touched on it in my introduction letter, but for all their friends and all the other students throughout the school system. I'm committed to all of them because our children is our future, and I'll certainly do what I can to preserve their good experience throughout the school system. Again, also very passionate with teacher relations. I'll stress it again. I think there's some work to be done there. Again, being the son of a longtime educator, I'm quite passionate about that. So I'm hopeful I'll get the opportunity to kind of do what I can to work in that regard as well. So
thank you.
Appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Peter.
I think schools, when they're functioning the way we hope they would be, they help kids learn not what to think, but how to think, how to apply logic, how to look at facts, how to be empirical, how to distinguish between emotion and reason. And those are all things that we'll always need. We'll need them more now than ever. And I hope I would be, my service, I hope, would make a small contribution toward those goals. And I'd be happy to do it, to make that small contribution. But I think, as you see, I agree. I think my fellow candidates here were all, I think, well prepared and well qualified to do that job. So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I would echo. I think I'm actually very reassured as a constituent that no matter who wins, we're going to have a great representative. So that's good. Because that's what we need. And that's what we need in the next couple of years. It's going to be very challenging, kind of coming out of what the pandemic was. I think there's an opportunity there. I would very much like your vote. I think I have a lot of energy and passion and skill and experience and enthusiasm for this. I do promise that I will be accountable, as I said before. I think, there's a wealth of information about any physician online. I think one of the things you'll see, don't believe everything you read, but one of the things you'll see is to all my patients, I gave out my personal phone number and my email address. And, what was remarkable to me in 20 years, no patient ever abused that. And anytime somebody called me at 3:00 in the morning, I was very glad that they did, because it saved problems. And I think that part of our democracy is hearing people's voices. And so I would close by saying, everybody vote. No matter what you're doing, get out and vote. I told everybody who signed my nominating sheet, so few people turn out at school board elections. Your vote's like 20. So definitely go out there. And they're like, sure, but really it would be great to have everybody out to vote. And also going towards November, we have to, make our voices heard. That's the way a democracy functions. It doesn't matter what side we come out on, as long as it's heard. And we want to make sure there aren't unelected bureaucrats making decisions for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. And I wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you, Eric.